Every now and again, I think it's important to challenge yourself as an artist. One of my favorite ways of doing so is trying to create something new or something different to what I usually create. As an artist and as a producer, I've been making the same type of beats and following the same structure, using the same templates and the same sounds for a little while now, and that's something that's really easy to do. In this video, I wanted to try a new subgenre of lo-fi and try and make an Asian lo-fi song. So I just thought it'd be a fun experiment to switch things up and try something new. So I made a beat last week. Let's break it down. Now, Asian lo-fi isn't as big as sleepy lo-fi or ambient right now, but it's definitely still got its own audience. This is a subgenre that seems to be really championed by a few really big artists, namely Tenno, Raimu, and DaniSogen, and these were the artists I was really inspired by when making this beat. So let's jump into this and see how we did it. Now, with all of my beats, the first thing that I did here was start with the piano chord progression, because that is what really sets the tone for the whole track. I started off with this 4-bar chord progression, and one of the things that I noticed really prevalent in a lot of the Asian lo-fi stuff is that the chords are hitting at different intervals to what you'd maybe hear in a sleepy track. They don't necessarily stick to the 1s and the 3s, they don't necessarily fall on the beats. It has a more dynamic time signature to that of a normal beat. So starting the song off with this A sharp minor 7 chord, and then I've duplicated the octave on that A sharp. Then moving into this second chord. I'm not exactly sure what this chord is. If you can figure it out, let me know in the comments. Then pretty quickly moving into this F sharp major 9 chord. And finishing there with a G sharp major triad. Really simple chord, just to nicely finish it off. One more thing that you may have noticed there is this downwards moving kind of top line progression for the chords that gives it this whole kind of downwards moving feeling. And that's something that really stood out to me from a lot of the Tenno and DaniSogen tracks. Now, I haven't got any processing on this piano at all. This is just the pure sound from the original cinematic soft piano. Once I had my chords, I knew that I was working in an F major scale, so I layered in this really simple drone, just playing an F and a C continuously throughout the whole song. I left a bit more of the high end in that sound compared to my usual sound because it's not a sleepy track. From there, I just kind of wanted to keep building layers. So I added in a second piano, and this is doing a similar thing to the drone, but just playing that F and C note repetitively. I've played the velocities a little bit, so it comes in a bit softer and a bit harder, and just adds a nice little bit of movement to that piano chord progression. And then you'll notice here in kind of the main drop, what I've done with the piano is added in a few more notes to give it some more melody as well. So in that main drop, the piano sounds like this. With that additional F minor chord playing here once more. From there, I layered in a nice pad sound onto my pianos, and this is again using the original's cinematic soft piano from Spitfire, but I've turned the pad all the way up and I've turned everything else down, so we just get this kind of ghostly pad sound. Just adding some really nice granular texture to the song at this point. And that's kind of also playing the part of strings, which is another instrument that is really prominent in Asian lo-fi. I didn't want to add strings at this point, so I just added a really soft pad in the background. From there, I layered in a really simple bass, following along with the root notes of the chords. I just want to have a talk about drums for a little while. So the drums in this track, if you can see here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 7 different layers of drums. There's actually only 3 instruments. There's a kick, a snare, and a hat. But the snare and the hat each have 3 different sounds layered together. A lot of the stuff that I heard in my reference tracks was these kind of organic, crispy sounding drums. I started off with a really simple like subby kick. And then I started layering in snares. So I've got the first snare here. Got that kind of like crispy organic sound. Layered in a second snare here, which is actually a clap. And I've shifted this over ever so slightly to the right. And then finally a rim shot to bring it all together. And then on every third beat, I dropped out that clap just to keep it a little bit more interesting, keep it moving. For the hats, I've done a similar thing. We started off here with a stock FL Studio hat. This is the 808 closed hat. And I never thought I'd be using a stock FL Studio sound in one of my tracks, but it just worked really nicely. Then have a Cymatics Eternity closed hi-hat. And then finally this Ice Hat 3, which I think might also be an FL Studio stock sound. I've faded that sample in so that it's not quite as crispy, it's a bit more subtle in the background. Just getting the tail end of that sound on every single hit. Now at this point you might be saying to yourself, what's up? It doesn't sound like an Asian track, this just sounds like a slightly weird, sleepy lo-fi track. And you'd probably be right. And that's where the next few instruments kind of really take it to the next level and differentiate it from a normal sleepy lo-fi track. So the first thing they added was this lap steel from Labs. And this used to be one of my favorite instruments. Never use it anymore and I don't know why, so it was really fun to get to try this out again. And just following some of those notes from the chords, and we're using the resonance preset from Labs. So let's take a listen. And that on its own, I think takes this beat to like just a whole nother level. Processing on that, I've got a Flux Mini that's just kind of sidechaining the sound and doing this kind of weird warping effect to it. And that's acting really fast, so it's adding even more tremolo to the sound. We've got an EQ, focusing in really heavily on those high mids. And then I've got Raimu, adding a nice bit of reverb. Not loads, but a nice bit to wash the sound out. Then have some strings from BBC Symphony Orchestra. And I think these are violas. Yeah, this is a viola sound. Just again, layering in, kind of building that soundscape for an Asian lo-fi track. And these strings actually act kind of independently to everything else in the track. They're not following the chord pattern, they're not following the normal time signature. It's just these 2 notes repeated throughout. I've got an EQ on there, again, focusing on those high mids. And then the same, I've got Raimu again, less mix, longer delay, just washing that sound out ever so slightly. Finally, we get to the first real melody of the track, and that is this mandolin sound from Labs. And now when I found this, I was super stoked. So I'm using the picked one preset, just playing like a really simple melody here. And that repeats, that just repeats twice pretty much. So I chuck that in with the rest of the mix. And I use use that mandolin to kind of fill that space in the first half of my chord progression. But what you notice is that there is a big gap for this final chord, not only because there's just one chord playing for nearly 2 full bars, but because there's also no melodic elements happening there. So what I added was this bells sound, and this is something that I heard in one of the Tenno tracks that I was listening to, where he had a main melody that came in for the hooks and for the remainder of the song. He used the bells as kind of like an introduction to the melody, and they're not playing the same thing, but they do kind of come together at different points. So you'll see, I think at this point here, it's pretty much playing exactly the same thing the mandolin plays. So when they come together, you get the two melodies in harmony, and then they split off and the bells fill the rest of the track. So these bells play from the start, and yeah, they play pretty much throughout that first whole hook as well. Bringing our strings in. The only thing left to add at this point was a nice bit of ambience. So I used some dark winter rain near my house ambience to really set the mood. Super lovely. Trying out loads of different instruments that I've not used in a long time, if ever, and just playing around with different styles of production and different elements can be a really interesting way to kind of make you feel more creative. And I will tell you that I've taken stuff from this track and I've implemented them in some of my newer tracks that I've been working on. So it's really good to get out of your usual groove. The final element that I added to this was something that I heard a lot in DaniSogen's tracks, and that was a melodic like cello. So instead of the bells and all the other kind of stringy style instruments, we stripped everything back and then just let the cello come in and take over the whole song. There's quite a bit of automation that goes on in this track, so everything eases its way in just to kind of really slowly start the track off. And that's pretty consistent throughout the track. These strings also slowly rise in as well. And that's pretty much everything. Now I am actually super stoked with how this song came together. I think it sounds really cool. If you're someone who produces Asian lo-fi, drop some tips in the comments for anyone who's watching this video and for me, so that on my second try it can go even better than this one. Now I recently did a video just like this where I made a dark ambient track for the first time. If you haven't seen that one, click on the video that's on screen right now and you can go and watch that one.